current events, injustice, police brutality, systematic racism, politics. What say ye? Enough said.
Welcome back to another episode of Enough Said with your hosts, Gemmo and Carolite. And we have a guest speaker today with us, Chris Whilby, who Carolite will introduce in a minute. I just want to say we're the voice of the voiceless. And I just want to make a disclaimer that what we say on here is just our opinion. It's not the law, it's not the facts, so don't sue us about it. It's just our opinion. And you don't have to quote us. It's not the gospel. We have different opinion on here, and we're doing this because we all like to debate, right? And we want to give our opinions, and we think sometimes that our opinions are unique. So that's just a disclaimer. Welcome, Carolite.
So we were having a discussion the other day, and because of this discussion, we decided to have you come on board to voice your opinion and to give your intake about poverty in America. Is it self-created or is it systematic? What is it all about? I mean, why are there so many poor people in one of the richest countries on the planet?
Before we get to that, Chris, could you introduce yourself, please?
All right, my name is Chris Whilby. I am the owner of Caribbean Vibes Radio. It's an online radio station, and I invite everybody who get a chance to listen to it to hang on over.
So the first thing is poverty in America a choice or not? Carolite.
Say ye.
What say ye, Carolite?
First of all, we have to think about what exactly is poverty. What really is poverty?
Poverty is, to me, anyone who is living below the poverty line. Now, there are guidelines and standard in America. There's actually a poverty guideline that said if you have a family of 2, you should not make less than, and I think it was 20,000 or so per year. Don't hold me to that number. And if you're a family of 3, then they will go up in increments of about $4,000 or so. So, you know, and if you make less than that, then you're living below the poverty guideline. Another definition could be, for some people, is just making less than the minimum wage. You know, as you know, the minimum wage in America has been very low for a very long time, and a lot of people can't make ends meet, so they're poor. That's poverty, in my definition. Chris, what's your definition of poverty?
My definition is poverty is a person unable to meet the basic requirements of life. So if you are working and you are unable to provide for your children, you're unable to pay your bills and take care of yourself, then
Right.
You are definitely living in poverty. So a lot of people will look on poverty in different ways, but I believe that the basic way to see poverty is that you are unable to provide for yourself and your family.
Awesome. And for me, I look at it and it's going to be like a little choice of word here, but for me, it's not necessarily unable, but incapable of. For me, poverty is when someone is incapable of doing it. Now, here in America, where the debate started, is we have behavioral habits. And because of personal choice, because of personal behavioral habits, this is one of the reasons why there are persons within this country, and I would say the majority of the poor are unable to take care of themselves because of their behavioral habits, as opposed to because of the fact that they're incapable of taking care of themselves. And that is the point I wanted to make.
Well,
What say you?
First of all, you have to exclude certain people from your generalization. And remember, on our podcast, we're allowed to make generalization. It's very loose, it's very open. But most importantly, there is the ill, right? So we can all agree that the ill should be excluded. We have people in this country, and I don't know if you guys want to exclude them or not, but they're illegal. Let's not forget, they don't have a social security number. So they're living below the poverty guideline and can't take care of their family because they can't get a job or a decent job. Okay, so we have to exclude a lot of people who are incarcerated because there's no money going into that family. There's a lot of other things that we have to exclude. And of course, when I say illness, I mean both mental and physical disabilities, right? So once we, and I'm assuming that once we take those out of the group, is poverty a choice? I don't believe it is. And I can tell you why. I, especially in this country, believe that opportunities does not exist equally for everyone. I believe that, and I don't want to necessarily get into the race thing, but we may as well say it. I do believe that Black folks are not given the same opportunities. I do believe that because we didn't get our 40 acres and a mule, whatever that's equivalent to today, that has set us back. And I believe that because we can't afford things like life insurance, that some of the other groups can, I don't want to pick any particular one, or because we just make enough, we can't save as much. I think the system is set up to keep us in poverty. And that's my opinion. Chris?
All right, so I agree with you, Gemmo. I really do agree with you. And you touched on a very important point, and this is one which I have debated many, many times, where it is, when you compare the white folks and Black folks, and we may as well say it because the facts are out there. A lot of Black people in this country are unable to pass on any form of wealth to their children. And I'm not saying that to excuse Black people from succeeding, because we do have Black people who are succeeding, and we have Black people who are struggling, and their parents struggled, put them through school, and they are now in a position to finally access the resources necessary to succeed and then pass this on to the next generation. But for generations, what we had was this inequality where the white family was able to pass down to their children inheritance that they got from their fathers and forefathers and or foreparents, so to speak, which was gotten from slavery. So the inequity was always there. And so it is still in the system where a certain set of people still have to struggle, still not getting the living wage. They still have to work many jobs in order to put food on the table, to send their children to the right schools, to try and live a decent life, right? And so a lot of people are falling by the wayside. And I don't believe that it is a choice. It's, in my opinion, a lot of people are falling by the wayside because of the system and not necessarily because they want to. Because the minute you say it is a choice, it means that they chose to be poor.
Well, again, here comes the word choice, and a choice can be interpreted in different ways. Nobody is going to choose to be poor, but persons' behavioral habits force them into poverty. One of the main, and if you were to go in most of the houses in America, most of the houses in America, you will find food. If a person doesn't have food in their house in America, it tells me that they were too proud or too lazy to go to the various areas in America that provide food for people. Remember, we're in a country that provides food for the poor. There are food pantries, there are churches, there are neighbors that will come together and help people. So the point I was making before, and I will always say, you're in a country where you can at least get the help you need to get food, to get things for your kids to go to school. The country comes together and they help when it comes to helping the kids or helping the poor. There are other countries in the world that has absolutely no resources, none at all, for people who go without. And those people, like in Manila, Philippines, they live on the trash heaps because there is absolutely no resource. So when you're in a country where resources are provided that can help you with your situation, if you choose not to access those resources and end up without, then it does boil down to your choice.
Well, let me say this. It's spoken like a true person who has never been to a food pantry. If you go to a food pantry and all they're giving you is bread and a can of tomatoes over and over and over again, or you better head up to the burbs to get the real food, but you have no car. You sometimes only have a car fare, or you can't even take off from your little job that's just paying the rent to get up there. Then you'll realize that the so-called resources that this country is providing is not getting to everyone, or not everyone can make use of it. Because there are people who have gone to food pantries that have told me they went to 4, and we had this conversation before in one of our other podcasts. They went to 4, 3 were closed, and the one that was open ran out of food in less than an hour. And people were in long lines, and by the time they give the first 20 or so people, they were out of food. So what left with the other people? There are people in this country who are living in Republican states that will not qualify them for SNAP or food stamps. They will not qualify even though they're US citizens. There are people in this country who are not getting the things that the so-called resources that they're saying. And a lot of the resources, in my opinion, is on paper. As a practical matter, it doesn't trickle down. It doesn't happen. So we can't just make a generalization and say, there are right now lots of children who are poor and hungry right here in this country. You saw after the New Orleans, the Hurricane Katrina in Louisiana, you saw how many people were destitute, and some of them were destitute even before the hurricane. So what you have to do is realize that there are some people in the inner city that are not getting the resources that other people can get, who live maybe in a better neighborhood or have access to a car, for example. So it's not evenly distributed at all.
Yeah, so it's very interesting, and I love the fact that Caroline, she explained and she put in these different situations, and I love how Gemmo broke it down. And again, Caroline, I'm sorry, we're not ganging up on you, but I have to take Gemmo's side here again. And here's what I'm gonna say here, ladies. If you have to try to access these resources, it means that you are poor. In the first instance, if you cannot take care of yourself and your family, and you have to look to any form of outside help, for assistance, it means that you are poor. All right, so that's number one. Number two, to continue on Gemma's point, where she said that sometimes the resources are on paper, I would have to echo that sentiment, because here is the thing. A lot of these are really on paper, because when you try to access, I have known people who just give up. When you try to access these things, what you have to go through first and foremost to get to it, a lot of times people just say it's not worth it. The hoops that you have to jump through in order to quote unquote prove that you are eligible for these services, it makes no sense. A lot of these services, you can't just walk in and say, I am hungry, I need some food, and you get it. You have to go through a process. And there's a lot of red tapes, and you have to check the boxes, and you have to do this, you have to do that. Sometimes people just don't want to go to the humiliation of having so many people looking down on them as if they're trying to abuse the system, because a lot of people will look at you that way, as if you're trying to abuse the system or take advantage of the system. So a lot of times, that is why we have people falling through the cracks and just falling through by the wayside.
Chris, there is a reason why people from poor countries risk their lives to get to America. And the reason why these people risk their lives to get to America is because the difficulty in going through the process here does not compare to what they're leaving. The difference is, it is not, I'm not saying it is easy to get the help you need, but if you can afford to give up, if you can afford to walk away, if you can afford to not do everything it takes. Gemmo said, oh, this person went to 4 food pantries and there was no food. There is a church on almost in every city, in almost every square mile, I guess, you can find a church. In every city, there are something called community resources. So yes, it might be difficult to keep going and trying, but the difference is it is here. It may not be easy, but at least you have something. You're not in a country where there is absolutely nothing. And that is the reason why persons leave Haiti and risk their lives to get to the United States. They leave Manila, Philippines, risk their lives. The Mexicans risking their lives, because it's one thing to have a resource that you have to work hard to get versus to have nothing at all. So the choice again is yours. Do you want it bad enough? And I do want to end with this for this little part. A drowning man clutches at a straw. So if somebody is hungry enough, they have no choice about giving up. When you're hungry, you never stop until you get the help you need, if you know that there's help. And that's what you do. The laziness and the privilege of a lot of people in this country is what prevents them, and the pride. Because nobody wants to ask, nobody wants to beg, nobody wants to let somebody know this is my situation and I need help. So a lot of times it's the choice that causes the people to be in such dire straits.
All right. Well, if you think it's just a choice, why are so many? Have you been to LA and see them all the homeless people on the street? I mean, there are more homeless people than people sometimes. And you've seen them in your cities, you've seen them everywhere. If they had, you think they choose to, all of them, some of them might, don't get me wrong, some of them might choose to be on the street, but not all of them do. You have places that before they can help you, you have to have an address, and people don't have an address because they're homeless. You have places that want ID, and people can't get ID because they maybe came out of prison or whatever. They can't afford the $36, believe it or not, to go get a state ID or whatever it costs at this time. You know, there are so many different circumstances that you can't paint everybody with such a wide brush.
That's what we need to pay attention to. What are the circumstances that lead people to end up where they are? And usually, what I have found, there's usually some behavioral practice, because I've never seen a disciplined person who isn't wasteful, who isn't spending money on pleasure in this country, who is frugal, who is responsible, who will go and work at anything. To me, I've never seen a person like that.
Oh, for you to spend money, you have to have money. First of all, for you to spend money, you have to have money. Second of all, you haven't been around enough. There's 50 states, and I haven't been around enough to know the different conditions. I know people, and by the way, a friend of mine wanted to come on, but I just spoke to her right before we came on, so it was too late. And she said that she was kicked out of the house at the age of 16, and she made it in life, you know, from all the way up. So she believed, like you do, that poverty is a choice in this country.
You should have brought her on.
She could come on. I just spoke to her. She was driving home. So, but what I'm saying is, so you would have had company. But the thing is, you guys are painting everybody with a very broad brush. It's such a big generalization. I'm telling you, there are people who are in this country working 3-4 jobs and don't have enough to make ends meet because their rent is so expensive. Just imagine a minimum wage person. How can they afford to pay rent, to buy clothes for their kids if they have 1 or 2 kids or 3, whatever amount, and to send their kids to school? You have mothers who are doing without just so their kids can eat. You know, so don't say that they have to be frugal. There's no money to be frugal with. There's not enough coming in. And not everyone, unfortunately, have a higher education where they can get the jobs that they want. Go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead, Chris.
All right. Half of America would disagree with Carol, what she's saying. Half of America would vehemently disagree.
Maybe more than half.
I'm being conservative. to say that, because there are people in this country who are working their tail off, and they will consider themselves poor because they are one paycheck away from being bankrupt. They are one paycheck away from being homeless. They are one paycheck away from not having enough food in their houses. And if you think that's a lie, when you have a pandemic like this one that hit, and most people have to stop working, most people, hardworking people, ambitious people, who live in their houses, paying their bills, trying to be frugal, trying to be responsible, they are unable to make it if something suddenly comes up where they need some extra money to spend. And so these people would disagree with Carol for saying that they are too lazy to access resources. They really don't want to access any resources. They want to work and pay their bills and whatever. But the system is designed so that they remain poor. It's just from paycheck to paycheck.
Poverty, you have to, again, I'm not saying poverty is a choice in that you were born poor in a poor situation. I am saying you are in a country where you do not have to stay there. If you can get a job paying you $5 an hour, if you can get a living job, remember, it's a country of many resources and many options, and you can get a job paying you $5 an hour. What makes a lot of people poor in America are unprepared for kids. Most people have kids and they were not financially prepared for the child. So again, when that child comes that you were not financially prepared for, and then you have to struggle to do whatever it takes to care for your child, you cannot look and say, I am poor because, why are you poor? Because you, and I am one of those persons, I had a child that I had not prepared financially for. And this is what you find among a lot of people who are saying they're poor. Very few single. Most of them are people with many kids that they did not prepare for financially. And many people who say they're poor, they are buying and spending and wasting a lot of money on pleasure. There's the cigarettes, there is the pleasure, there's the movie, there is the liquor. If you look at some of these people's budget and what they spend money on, they could have got themselves out of a difficult one-room situation and own a house today.
Remember now, capitalism is based on people being rich. It's like a hierarchy or a pyramid where you have rich at the top and then you have the middle class and the lower class. So in most society that's a capitalistic society, you're going to have poor people anyway. It's just the way the system is designed. You understand?
Exactly.
So there's no choice in that for anyone. You're either going to be the factory owner or you're going to work in the factory and clean the floors and get minimum wage. You're assuming that you say people spending money on cigarettes and that and that and that. People have big money for cigarettes or big bum cigarettes off the street. You're assuming that people have money to spend. Some people don't have the money to spend. Go ahead.
Again, you're in a country that provides food stamp. If you have a choice,
for everybody.
In every city, the person who doesn't work, there's food stamp provided. The person who has kids get money. They get money for it. A lot of people are living off this type of system, and yet and as they are getting the help, as they're getting the help. Go ahead, Chris.
So wouldn't you say those people are poor if they are living off the system? If they have to be living off the system, wouldn't you define them as being poor? Because I'm quite sure the rich people aren't going to be living. If you are rich, you're not living off the system.
To me, poor is when there's no system to live off.
Oh,
poor
really?
is when you cannot afford to live. That is poor to me. If there's a system that gives you food, if there's a system that gives you money, if there's a system that provides jobs, even though they may be menial job, housekeeping, gardening, walking the dog jobs, if there's a system that provides it, then you can get a job. You don't.
So by your definition, we don't really have poor people living in America then.
You don't need to be poor.
No, not a matter of need. We don't have, by your definition, if there is a system that gives you food and there's a system that will assist you, you are not poor. That's your definition. You're not. Oh, okay.
Because
so that is weird. So that is where we are having the problem.
You cannot provide basic need, and basic need: food, clothing, shelter. There is nowhere in America.
That's
a lot of those homeless. Wait a second. Let me finish, Jen.
That's not true.
Let me finish. A lot of those homeless people on the street. A lot of them prefer to be on the street than in a shelter. A lot of the homeless people on the street are on the street because of drugs and behavioral choices. Not because they couldn't get a job and work hard at the job and afford themselves a one room. A lot of them are on the street, and I'm not saying there won't be times in your life, you know, where you might have a difficult period where it's difficult, but the country provides, and you don't have to stay there.
Let me say this. Food stamp is $199 a month for the average person. I know people who live by themselves and can't buy enough food for that. That's done in 2 weeks. They're hungry for the next 2. And even when they try to conserve, because cost of living has gone up more than food stamps have, then it has not caught up with inflation. So don't until you live in the situation where you're getting food stamps, your rent is not being paid. So some of these people, you know, all they have is the stamps, that it's no longer cash, and they can't pay their rent. They'll be happy to trade off the food stamps to someone who will give them some money to pay their rent. So then they're hungry again for, instead of 2 weeks, now 3. You have to live it to understand.
But their grandmothers did living jobs. That was what living job was for. When you can't afford to live and pay your rent, you go to somebody and say, can I be your housekeeper in exchange for rent and food? How is it that your grandparents did it in order to provide for you, and you're now in a much better system than your grandparents were in, and yet you are living poorer than your grandparents? The same reason
why you wouldn't go plant yam like our grandfather did in the country. Things have evolved, and today a farmer, most people don't have the stamina or the ability to be a farmer, and a lot of times it's so antiquated anyway because they have machines making all these foods, or big farms that are producing mass that your farm is not sold. It's the same reason with the housekeeping. If your mother was a housekeeper, you don't want to still be a housekeeper. You want to be better than that. And if you even want to be a housekeeper, a lot of these housekeeping jobs are no longer available. You know why? Because the people can't afford, who used to pay, no longer can afford to pay. You know, so it's the jobs are not out there, and you have to look at the job market. If the job market is high, unemployment is high, where are they going to get the housekeeping job? It doesn't exist.
Because of COVID. Because of COVID, we're in a totally different period.
I'm not even talking COVID.
You know,
go ahead, Chris.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that Carol is arguing on that basis, because I really don't know what universe she lives in. I live and I see so many situations and so many different people, and the reason sometimes I see people cry when they can't make it, and it's not because of a lack of trying. So those people would find it very offensive for Carol to say it's because of their fault why they are in the situation that they are in.
We thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Enough Said. We are the voice of the voiceless, and we just would like to thank myself, Carolite, and our special guest today, Chris. Hope you can come on again. Excellent. Like, subscribe, and share, guys. And thank you for watching. We love you.
Thank you. Enough said.
Enough said.
Enough said.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Current events, injustice, police brutality, systematic racism, politics. What say ye? Enough said.